I've been the manager of Hargrove's Diner in New Orleans for about 4 years now. It's an old-school cafe, red leather booths, checkered floors, a jukebox in the corner that only plays songs from the 50s. The place has history, and honestly, that's what makes it special. Or at least that's what I thought. It started with the phone calls. At first, I didn't think much of them. A couple of customers calling in, asking about a waiter who, according to them, gave them a weird feeling. One woman swore he looked out of place, like he belonged in another decade. Tall guy, gray hair, old-fashioned uniform, she described. He was polite, but something was off. I told her we didn't have any older waiters on staff, but she insisted. Said she saw him clear as day, even left a tip on the table before he vanished. Then the calls kept coming. By the 5th or 6th complaint, I started feeling uneasy. None of my employees matched the description. And yet, customers swore up and down that this man was serving tables every night. I finally checked the security footage, and that's when I saw him. The cameras showed a tall man with neatly combed gray hair, wearing an outdated uniform, pressed white shirt, black tie, and suspenders. He moved like he belonged there, taking orders, refilling coffee cups, even smiling at customers. Only problem? He wasn't real. I rewound the footage, watching him closely. There was something wrong about the way he moved. Too fluid, too deliberate, like he had done this for decades. Then I noticed something that made my blood run cold. Every time he passed by a mirror or a window reflection, he wasn't there. I blinked, rewound, played it again. Nothing. Like he was a shadow. The realization hit me like a punch to the gut. This wasn't just a case of mistaken identity. There was someone, or something, working in my diner. I barely slept that night. My mind kept replaying the footage over and over. I tried to come up with a logical explanation. A prank, a camera glitch, maybe even some customer hallucinating things. But none of that made sense. The next morning, I went digging. If this man was real, there had to be a record of him. Hargrove's Diner had been around since 1927, and lucky for me, the storage room in the back still held old employee files, dusty photographs, and yellowed newspapers from decades ago. I spent hours combing through them until, finally, I found him. A black and white staff photo from 1957. The employees were lined up, smiling in their crisp uniforms. And there, standing in the middle, was the man from the footage. His name was printed underneath. Walter Hargrove. I felt a chill crawl down my spine. Hargrove? That couldn't be a coincidence. Digging further, I found an old newspaper article from the same year. The headline made my stomach drop. Local waiter killed in late-night robbery at Hargrove's Diner. My hands trembled as I read. Walter had been the original owner's nephew and had worked here for over 20 years. One night after closing, 2 men broke in, demanding money. When Walter refused to open the safe, they shot him in the chest and left him to die on the checkered floor. His body was never removed from the building. According to the article, Hargrove's reopened just days later, and the owner chose to bury Walter beneath the floorboards near the kitchen. For decades, it was just a rumor, a ghost story passed down by old employees. But now I had proof. After that, things started to change. Customers whispered about strange happenings, plates sliding off tables, lights flickering, the faint scent of old-fashioned aftershave lingering in the air. One night, a waitress ran into my office, pale as a sheet. "You need to see this," she said, breathless. She pulled up the live security feed. I watched, heart pounding, as the gray-haired man stood behind the counter polishing a coffee cup. But then he looked up, right into the camera, and smiled. I slammed the laptop shut, my hand shaking. That was the first time I felt it. Not just fear. Something deeper. Something telling me I wasn't in control anymore. That night, I made a decision. I had to stay after closing, alone. If Walter was still here, if he was really haunting this place, I needed to know why. By midnight, the diner was silent. The chairs were stacked, the lights dimmed, and the only sound was the occasional hum of the old jukebox, as if something was breathing through it. I stood by the counter, heart pounding. "Walter," I called out. My voice barely echoed. "If you're here, show me." At first, nothing happened, just the soft ticking of the clock. Then, I smelled it. That same faint scent of aftershave. A shadow moved in the reflection of the window across from me, and when I turned, he was there. Walter stood just a few feet away, his uniform pristine, his hands calmly folded in front of him. He looked just like he did in the footage. Gray hair, pressed shirt, a presence that felt timeless. He wasn't threatening. He just watched me. "You take good care of this place," he said finally, his voice deep, almost nostalgic. I couldn't breathe. My words caught in my throat. "Why are you still here?" Walter's expression didn't change, but I swear, for just a second, something flickered in his eyes. Then he looked past me, toward the empty tables, the dim lights, the faint glimmer of the coffee pots behind the counter. "This place was my life," he said quietly. "And now, it's yours." A chill wrapped around me. Then, in the glass of the window, I saw it, our reflections. But something was wrong. Walter's was there. Mine wasn't. I staggered back, my pulse hammering in my ears. Walter smiled, a knowing, almost gentle smile. And then, the lights flickered, and everything went black. The staff showed up for the morning shift, but I wasn't there. My car was still in the parking lot, my belongings untouched in my office, but there was no sign of me. Just the security footage. They checked it, expecting answers. Instead, they found something chilling. The cameras showed me standing behind the counter at 3 a.m., filling coffee cups, smiling at customers, just like Walter. Some places don't let go of the people who love them. Or maybe, some people don't let go of the places they love. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like the video and subscribe for more terrifying true tales. You never know who or what might be watching. I work the evening shifts at Bloomingdale's in Manhattan. It's a decent job, mindless mostly, but the pay is all right, and I get an employee discount. The only downside? The closing routine. Something about walking through an almost empty department store after hours creeps me out. Tonight I was finishing my last task, checking the fitting rooms. Most of the lights were already off, leaving only the soft glow from the emergency exits. I went through the usual motions, pulling back the curtains one by one. Empty, empty, empty. I was about to leave when I caught something in the mirror at the end of the row. A woman. She was wearing a long red dress, standing in one of the stalls. My stomach clenched. I had checked every fitting room. She wasn't supposed to be there. I turned around fast. Nothing. The stall was empty. But when I looked back at the mirror, she was still there. A cold shiver ran down my spine. I blinked hard, hoping my eyes were playing tricks on me. The woman's reflection didn't move. She just stood there deep in the mirror with a neutral expression. Then suddenly, her lips curved into a slow, unnatural smile. I stumbled backward, my breath catching in my throat. "Ben," I called, my voice barely above a whisper. Ben, my co-worker, was finishing up near the registers. When he finally came over, I pointed at the mirror, my hands trembling. There's someone there." Ben squinted at the glass. "What?" "I don't see anything." I looked again. The woman was gone. I let out a nervous laugh, brushing my hair back. "Guess I'm just tired." Ben snorted. "Maybe lay off the horror movies, Turner." He clapped me on the shoulder before heading to the back room. I forced myself to breathe, shook off the unease, and turned away. But just as I reached the exit, I glanced at the mirror one last time, and she was back. This time she was mimicking my exact posture, her head tilted at the same angle as mine. Except Her eyes? Her eyes weren't blinking. I didn't sleep well that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw her, the woman in red, her eyes unblinking, her smile too wide. By the time my shift started the next evening, I had almost convinced myself it was just my imagination. Almost. The store was busy, packed with last-minute shoppers, which kept my mind off the night before. But when closing time rolled around, I felt that familiar sense of unease settle in my chest. I was alone again, checking the fitting rooms. The overhead lights were dim, casting long shadows. I forced myself to go through the usual routine, pulling back each curtain, making sure no one was inside. Empty. 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 Then, just as I was about to turn away, I heard it. A soft tap. It came from one of the mirrors. My body froze. The sound came again. Tap, 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 like fingernails gently rapping against glass. I swallowed hard. Hello? My voice came out shaky. I wasn't sure what I was expecting. Maybe a prank, some late-night customer messing around. But then, from the darkened fitting room, I heard it. A whisper, so quiet I almost didn't catch it. Sophie. I ran out of there so fast I nearly tripped over a display rack. Ben was already clocking out when I reached the back room. I was breathless, shaking, trying to form words, but he just looked at me like I was crazy. You okay? I heard something. Ben raised an eyebrow. Heard what? In the fitting room, I gasped, still trying to catch my breath. Someone said my name. Ben sighed, rubbing his temples. Sophie, the store is empty. It's late. You're just freaking yourself out. I wanted to argue, but he was already halfway out the door. I took a deep breath and told myself the same thing. I'm just tired. Just overthinking. I grabbed my coat and my bag, ready to leave. Bang. A loud, violent knock echoed from the fitting rooms. I stopped cold. Then a second bang, this time even louder. The sound wasn't coming from the wall. It wasn't from a door. It was coming from the mirror, and beneath it a slow, drawn-out giggle. I didn't move. The air felt thick, suffocating. My pulse hammered in my ears as I stared at the mirror, waiting, dreading what would happen next. The fitting room was silent now, but I knew I wasn't alone. Slowly, against every instinct screaming at me to run, I took a step forward, then another. The closer I got, the more the glass seemed wrong. It wasn't just a reflection. The woman in the red dress was there, standing in the mirror's depth like she was in a separate room, one that shouldn't exist. She wasn't smiling anymore. She was watching me. I lifted my hand, just a tiny movement, and her fingers twitched at the same time, but slower, like there was a delay. My stomach dropped. That wasn't me. That thing in the mirror wasn't copying me. It was deciding when to move. A sharp chill ran through me as the lights flickered once, then died. Darkness. And then, a hand shot out of the glass. Pale fingers clamped around my wrist, ice cold, pulling me toward the mirror. I screamed, but the store was empty. No one was coming. I clawed at the floor, fighting, but the grip only tightened. The glass rippled like water, and before I could take another breath, the surface swallowed me whole. Then, silence. The next morning, my manager, Mr. Callahan, reviewed the security footage. At 2:17 a.m., the cameras caught me standing alone in front of the mirror. Then, my reflection reached out, grabbed me, and pulled me inside. I vanished. But my reflection? It was still there, standing in the fitting room, smiling. I never believed in ghost stories. Not really. Sure, I had heard my fair share of weird encounters, especially back when I was a cop. But most of them had explanations. Logical ones. That's what I told myself. That was before I started working as a night security guard at the Mall of America in Minnesota. It was a quiet job mostly. The kind where you sip on bad coffee and walk the same routes 100 times a night. The kind where nothing ever happens, except for the damn elevator 13. I noticed it during my first week. Every night around 3 a.m. it would move on its own. Always up, always to the 6th floor. That might not sound strange to you, but here's the thing. There is nothing on the 6th floor. No stores, no offices. Nothing but empty hallways that haven't been used in years. So why was the elevator going up there? And why was it always at the exact same time? The other guards didn't like talking about it. It's just a glitch, one of them, Mark, told me. Just ignore it. A glitch? Maybe, but it didn't feel like one. And that's why one night I decided to check it out for myself. At exactly 3 a.m., I stood by the security desk and watched the camera feed. Right on schedule, the button for the 6th floor lit up. The elevator started moving. I grabbed my flashlight and headed toward it. By the time I reached it, the doors had already opened. The hallway beyond was dark. Too dark. The overhead lights were flickering, casting long, distorted shadows. And then I saw her, a little girl. She stood inside the elevator, wearing a white dress, her long hair covering part of her face. She was barefoot. Her skin was pale, almost gray under the artificial light. I froze. "Hey," I called out. "Are you lost?" She didn't answer. She just stood there, staring at me. Something was wrong. My gut screamed at me to walk away, but my legs wouldn't move. The air inside the elevator felt heavy, thick. Then, just as I took a hesitant step forward, the doors began to close. "Wait!" I lunged toward them, but it was too late. The elevator went up. I rushed back to the security desk, my hands shaking as I rewound the footage. And that's when my blood ran cold. The elevator had been empty the entire time. No little girl, no one. Just the doors opening and closing, over and over again. And right before they shut for the last time, the audio picked up something. A whisper. "You came for me." I didn't sleep that morning. I sat in my car outside the mall, hands gripping the wheel, replaying the footage on my phone over and over again. The girl had been there, I saw her, but the camera showed nothing, just an empty elevator moving on its own. I needed answers. By noon, I was sitting in a local diner with my laptop open, digging into the mall's history. I wasn't expecting much, maybe a maintenance record, an old construction file, but what I found made my stomach turn. 20 years ago, a little girl named Lillian Myers disappeared in this very mall. She had been shopping with her mother when she wandered off. The last known sighting of her, near an elevator. Security footage from that night showed the doors closing, but she was never seen leaving. They searched everywhere, inside the walls, the ventilation shafts, even the elevator shafts, but there was no trace of her. No blood, no clothes, nothing. It was like she had just vanished. The worst part, the elevator she was last seen in was elevator 13. I shut my laptop, my pulse racing. This wasn't just a glitch. That night, I made a decision. I wasn't going to run. I wasn't going to ignore it. I was going to step into that elevator. At 3 a.m., I stood in front of elevator 13, heart pounding. The mall was silent except for the hum of the overhead lights. The button for the 6th floor was already lit up. The doors slid open. I hesitated for just a second before stepping inside. The air was freezing. The moment the doors closed behind me, the lights inside flickered violently and the elevator jolted like something had slammed into it from the outside. I pressed the buttons. All of them. Nothing worked. The display panel glitched, random numbers flashing across it, then stopping at 666. Then, the lights went out. The only sound was my own breathing. And then, something else. A whisper. "Do you see me now?" I spun around. She was standing in the corner. Her face was wrong. Her mouth stretched too wide. Her eyes were nothing but black voids. The elevator plummeted. I tried to scream, but the force knocked the air from my lungs. My ears popped. My stomach lurched. Then suddenly, silence. The doors slid open. I stumbled forward, gasping for breath. But I wasn't on the 6th floor, I wasn't anywhere. The hallway in front of me was endless, dimly lit, the walls covered in missing persons posters, all of them children. And then I saw it, right in the middle, my own face. I don't know how long I stood there staring at that poster of myself. It was old, faded, like it had been there for years. My name was printed at the top in bold black letters. Damon Reeves, missing since 2023. I felt like I was going to be sick. This didn't make sense. This wasn't possible. I was right here. Then the lights flickered and I heard footsteps. Slow, deliberate. I turned around just in time to see the little girl standing at the other end of the hallway. She wasn't alone. Behind her, shapes moved in the darkness, dozens of them. Small figures, shifting in the shadows, whispering. Trapped. Lillian tilted her head. You shouldn't have come. The hallway began to shrink, closing in around me. I ran. The air grew thick, heavy, like I was wading through water. My vision blurred. My body felt sluggish, but I kept moving. I had to get out. The whispers turned into screams. Hands reached from the walls, clawing at me, trying to pull me in. I spotted the elevator ahead, its doors still open. I threw myself inside. The moment I hit the floor, the doors slammed shut. The elevator shot up. I was weightless for a second before it jolted to a stop. The doors slid open, revealing the security office. It was morning. Had I imagined everything? I stumbled out, my entire body trembling. But something felt off. The mall was quiet. Too quiet. Then I saw the security footage on the monitor. My stomach dropped. The screen showed me stepping into the elevator at 3 a.m. The doors closed, and they never opened again. I don't remember leaving. I don't remember getting into my car or driving home. All I know is that by the time I snapped out of it, I was in my apartment, staring at the blank walls like I'd been there for hours. No one called me. No one asked where I had been. When I checked my phone, I saw messages from my boss. Damon, you didn't show up last night. Call me ASAP. If you don't call me by noon, I have to replace you. I stared at the messages, my blood turning to ice. I had been there. I had been in the elevator, hadn't I? I checked the mall's security website. The staff page had already been updated. My name was gone, and in my place, a new name, Vincent Matthews, a new night guard. I picked up my phone, my hands shaking, and dialed my boss. The line rang, and rang, and rang. Then finally, someone picked up, but it wasn't my boss. It was a child's voice. Do you see me now? The call dropped. I stared at my phone, my breath coming in short gasps. I looked around my apartment. Everything looked the same, normal. But then I saw my closet door. It was open, and inside, staring back at me, was the little girl in the white dress. The screen cuts to black. If you made it this far, don't forget to like this video and subscribe to the channel for more terrifying stories. You never know what might be waiting behind the next door. I work the graveyard shift at a Denny's off I-90 in Chicago. It's a dead zone most nights, just a couple of truckers, a few drunks looking for coffee, and the occasional college kid pulling an all-nighter. I'm used to weird customers. You kind of have to be when you work these hours. But there's one guy, the 3 a.m. man. Every night, at exactly 3 a.m., he walks in. Black suit, crisp white shirt, a tie that never seems to move, no matter how much the AC blows. He always orders a black coffee and sits at the same booth right in the corner. He never speaks, never looks at a menu, never even acknowledges anyone. At first, I didn't think much of it. Some people just like routine. But after a few weeks, I started noticing things. No one else ever seemed to see him come in. One minute, the booth would be empty. The next, he'd just be there. No sound, no footsteps. And his coffee? It never cooled down. It would stay steaming hot, even when untouched for half an hour. I asked my coworker Jordan if he knew anything about him. He just shook his head. "He's always been here, man. Just leave it alone." That response didn't sit right with me. So the next night I decided to talk to him. I brought his coffee over, hesitated for a second, then said, "Hey sir, I see you here every night. You got a favorite order or something?" Nothing. No reaction. I tried again. "You, live nearby?" Slowly he lifted his head, and that's when I saw his eyes. They were wrong. Not just dark, but empty, like looking into a void where something should be but wasn't. And for the first time since I'd been working there, he smiled. Not a normal smile. A slow, unnatural stretch of his lips as if he was remembering how to do it. I felt my stomach drop. Something inside me was screaming to walk away. But I stood there, frozen, coffee pot still in my hand. Then he blinked and suddenly I was back behind the counter like I'd never moved. The coffee pot was already in the machine. The booth was empty. I checked the clock. 3:07 a.m. Had I imagined the whole thing? That night I barely slept. I kept thinking about the way he looked at me, that empty stare, the way he smiled like it didn't belong on his face. But what really messed with me was the time jump. I lost 7 minutes. The next night I went to work as usual, but I felt off, like my skin didn't fit right. And then, at exactly 3 a.m., he walked in. I tried to act normal. I even told myself I wouldn't look at him, wouldn't engage, just pour the coffee, move on. But when I placed the cup on his table, he spoke. One word, my name. I nearly dropped the coffee pot. He shouldn't know my name. I forced myself to laugh. "How do you know my name?" I asked, trying to sound casual. He just lifted his coffee, took a slow sip, and set it back down without breaking eye contact. I backed away. My hands were shaking. That was the moment I decided. I needed to know who this guy was. I made up my mind. Tonight, I would follow him. I clocked out at 4 a.m. The restaurant was nearly empty, just me, Jordan, and a couple of truckers. I waited by the window watching as the man finished his coffee. At 4:13 a.m. he stood up. He didn't pay. He never did. He walked out, not even opening the door, just stepping into the dark like the glass wasn't there. I grabbed my jacket and followed, keeping a good distance behind him. He moved too smoothly, like his feet weren't really touching the ground. He turned onto a side street, heading toward a narrow alleyway between two old brick buildings. I hesitated. Everything in my gut told me to turn back, but then, right before he stepped into the alley, he stopped. Without turning around, he spoke again. "You shouldn't be here, Miguel." A cold wave crashed over me. I never told him my name. And before I could react, he walked into the alley and vanished. Not walked out of sight. Not turned a corner. Just gone. Like he had stepped into a place that wasn't there. I ran back to the restaurant, heart pounding. I wasn't going to work the next night. I wasn't going back at all. I called in sick the next night. I wasn't ready to face whatever that thing was. But curiosity is a disease. It eats at you. And by the next evening, I found myself back at Denny's just as the shift was changing. Jordan was behind the counter looking pale. "Dude," he said the moment he saw me. "What the hell happened to you last night?" My stomach turned. "What do you mean?" He hesitated. Then he motioned for me to follow him to the back office where the security monitors were. I checked the footage. "You need to see this." He hit play. I watched myself on the screen. I saw myself walk out the door and follow the man. But when the camera switched angles, the alley was empty. I wasn't there. The man in the suit? He was nowhere on the footage. But I had been there. I remembered standing in that alley. I remembered his voice. And then Jordan rewound the tape. There at 3 a.m. the man sat in his usual booth. But as the footage played in slow motion, his shadow moved differently. The overhead lights weren't causing it. The shadow was stretching, twisting, reaching for something unseen. And at one point, it turned its head toward the camera. I backed away from the screen, my skin crawling. "I'm done," I whispered. I grabbed my stuff and left. I didn't even clock in. I should have never come back. But the thing is, Denny's never lets you leave that easily. I don't know why I drove back there the next night. Maybe some part of me wanted to prove that it was all just exhaustion, a hallucination, a bad dream. I walked inside. It was quieter than usual. And then, at 3:00 a.m. sharp, the bell above the door chimed. I turned. The man in the suit walked in. This time, he didn't sit down. He walked right up to me. "Are you ready to serve?" His voice was low, distorted, like hearing someone talk underwater. I couldn't move. My body wasn't mine anymore. He reached out, his fingers hovering just over my chest. And then, everything went black. The next morning, the manager showed up for his shift and found the place empty. My uniform was folded neatly on the booth where the man always sat. The security footage showed me serving him. Then, at 3:06 a.m., I vanished into thin air, like I was never there to begin with. No trace of me, no witnesses. But the man, he was still sitting in the booth, waiting for the next graveyard shift worker to take my place. I never believed in ghosts, not until that night. It was my first graveyard shift at Pier 24 Market, a 24-hour convenience store near the docks in Seattle. The place smelled like damp cardboard and stale coffee, and the fluorescent lights buzzed overhead. It wasn't exactly a dream job, but I needed the money. It had been raining all night, the kind of cold, relentless drizzle that soaks into your bones. The streets were empty, except for the occasional passing car. The only sound inside was the hum of the refrigerator units lining the back wall. I was restocking shelves when it happened. The automatic door slid open. I turned, expecting to see a late-night customer, but the doorway was empty. I frowned. Maybe it was the wind. Faulty sensors. I stepped around the counter, looking outside. Nothing. Just the wet pavement reflecting the neon glow of the store's sign. Then, the door closed and opened again. A weird chill ran down my spine, but I shook it off and went back to organizing the snack aisle. That's when I heard the beep. The register had processed a transaction. I looked up. The screen showed a purchase. 1 bottle of soda and a bag of chips. But the store was empty. I froze, staring at the receipt printer as it spat out the slip. My hands were clammy as I reached for it. The total was there. The time. The itemized list. But the section where the payment method should have been? Blank. I felt my stomach tighten. I checked the security cameras, expecting to see... what? A glitch? But no, the footage showed the store, exactly as it was now. Silent. Empty. Then the door opened again. For a split second, the screen flickered. And there it was. A dark, distorted figure, barely visible in the grainy footage. It was standing right where the door should have been. The moment passed, and the image returned to normal. The door closed. I sat frozen, heart pounding, every instinct screaming at me to leave. But I didn't. I wish I had. I forced myself to breathe. I had to be imagining things. Maybe it was just a glitch in the system, a weird shadow from the rain outside. Yeah, that had to be it. But then I heard it. A faint crinkle, like a bag of chips being grabbed off the shelf. I turned slowly, my stomach twisting into knots. The snack aisle was right behind me, and one of the bags was missing. I stood there, gripping the counter so tightly my fingers ached. My mind raced for a logical explanation. Maybe I misplaced it earlier. Maybe someone walked in and I just didn't see them. But that didn't explain the security footage. I grabbed my phone, planning to call my manager, but my fingers felt stiff and clumsy. The second I unlocked the screen, the store's radio crackled to life. It wasn't playing music, it was static. At first, I thought it was interference from the storm. But then, through the hissing, a voice whispered, "I'm right here." The words slithered through the speakers, barely more than a breath. I dropped my phone. It clattered to the floor. A cold weight settled in my chest. My eyes darted to the security monitor. The store looked empty, but then the soda bottle near the fridge began to slide forward inch by inch, as if unseen fingers were pushing it. And then it fell. The glass shattered, the loud crash cutting through the silence. The air felt heavy, like something was pressing down on me. I didn't realize I was backing away until my back hit the register. My breathing turned shallow. I wasn't alone. I could feel it. Then, the door opened again, and this time I heard footsteps. Slow, deliberate, coming straight for me. I couldn't move. The footsteps were soft but deliberate, like wet shoes pressing against tile. I gripped the edge of the counter, my nails digging into the cheap laminate surface. The security monitor flickered again. A figure was standing in front of the fridge, tall, unnaturally still. Its face was a blur, like a corrupted image trying to load. Then, as if it knew I was watching, it turned its head toward the camera. I gasped. The screen glitched, and suddenly the figure was closer. I looked up. The aisle was empty, but my body knew the truth. Something was here. I heard the register beep. Another transaction. My stomach flipped as I looked at the screen. Insufficient funds. The receipt printed anyway, and then a breath, cold and slow, right against my ear. My entire body locked up. I didn't want to turn around, but something deep inside me, some primal instinct, told me that I had to. I forced my head to move, and there he was, behind the counter, smiling. His skin was pale, waterlogged, like he had been pulled from the bottom of a lake. His eyes were sunken, hollow, and his clothes dripped with an unseen rain. I couldn't scream. He lifted a hand. His fingers, impossibly long and thin, reached toward my face. The lights flickered, and then everything went black. The next morning, the store manager arrived for his shift. The register was empty. The security monitor played only static. And Megan Holloway? She was never seen again. I was never a big fan of shopping malls. Something about them always felt off. Too many people, too much noise, and a weird sense of artificiality. But when Lakeview Mall opened in Chicago, it was impossible to ignore the hype. A brand new, ultra-modern shopping center with high-end boutiques, gourmet restaurants, and an underground parking lot that stretched for miles. I needed a job, and retail was an easy way in. That's how I ended up working at Elysium Apparel, a sleek boutique on the second floor. Expensive clothes, minimalist decor, and a ridiculous commission system that made sure we fought over every sale. The store had just opened, but business was booming. Every day, customers streamed in, eager to spend money on overpriced designer outfits. At first, everything seemed normal. People came in, browsed, tried on clothes, and bought things. But after a few days, I noticed something strange. Customers entered the store, but I never saw them leave. At first, I thought I was imagining things. The store had multiple exits, and it was easy to lose track of people. But then, other employees started disappearing too. Hannah, one of my co-workers, didn't show up for her shift. No call, no text, nothing. Then Jason, our stockroom guy, vanished. When I asked the manager, he just shrugged it off. People quit all the time, he said. But it didn't feel like quitting. One night, as we were closing, a man ran into the store frantic. His wife had gone into the dressing room to try on a dress, and she never came out. I checked inside. Empty. No clothes, no bags, nothing. Security was called, but by the time they arrived, the man had left. They chalked it up to a misunderstanding. But I knew what I saw, and I wasn't the only one. The next day, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was seriously wrong. I told Derek, one of my coworkers, about the missing customers. He laughed it off at first, but when I mentioned Hannah and Jason, his face darkened. I've been thinking the same thing, he admitted. Something's off about this place. We decided to check the security footage. Derek had a friend in mall security, Owen, who owed him a favor. After some convincing, Owen led us into the surveillance room after closing. The footage was wrong. We watched customers enter the store, browse, and walk toward the dressing rooms, but they never came out. There was no cut, no skipped frames, just an empty dressing room after they stepped inside. "This isn't possible," Owen muttered, rewinding the footage over and over. Then we saw Jason. The last recording of him showed him taking inventory in the stockroom. He turned toward the back, as if he heard something. Then, gone. No exit, no struggle, just gone. We sat there in silence, the weight of what we'd just seen settling in. "There's something behind that stockroom," Derek said. "We need to check it out." I should have said no. Every instinct screamed at me to walk away, but I needed to know. That night after closing, we snuck into the stockroom. The back wall looked solid, just like any other storage room. But there was a door. A heavy metal door that none of us had ever seen before. No handle, no markings, just locked shut. Derek grabbed a crowbar from the supply closet. It took everything we had, but after minutes of struggling, the lock gave way with a sickening crack. The door creaked open, revealing a long, narrow corridor. Dimly lit, silent. I took a deep breath and stepped inside. The corridor was suffocatingly narrow, the air thick with dust and something else, something rotting. The fluorescent lights above flickered weakly, casting long, warped shadows. We walked slowly, every footstep echoing unnaturally. At the end of the hall was another door, this one slightly ajar. I exchanged a look with Derek. Neither of us wanted to open it, but at this point, turning back wasn't an option. Inside was a dressing room, but not like the ones out front. This one looked old, abandoned. The walls were lined with mirrors, their glass warped and discolored. The air was freezing, and for a second I swore I could hear whispers, a low, distant chorus of voices, pleading, desperate. And then I saw them. The reflections, not ours, theirs. Dozens of faces, distorted and screaming, trapped behind the glass. Some pounded against the mirrors, their eyes wide with horror. Others just stared, vacant, their mouths moving silently. And among them, Jason. He was there, his hands pressed against the glass, eyes wild with terror. I stumbled backward, my breath catching in my throat. And that's when something grabbed Derek. A shadow, a hand, reached out from the mirror, gripping his wrist in a vice-like grip. His scream was cut short as he was yanked inside, his body disappearing into the reflection. I ran. I don't remember how I got out. All I remember is sprinting through the stockroom, through the store, and into the parking lot, gasping for breath. I tried to tell mall security, tried to tell the police, but no one believed me. By the time they investigated, the store was gone. The next morning, Elysium Apparel was closed, the windows blacked out. The store was stripped clean as if it had never existed. No one could tell me what happened to the employees, the customers, to Derek. The mall went on as usual. Shoppers filled the halls, completely unaware that something horrible had happened there. But I never went back. And yet, sometimes when I walk past a mirror, I swear I see a face staring back at me. Not my own. And at night, when I close my eyes, I still hear the whispers, pleading, begging, asking for help. But I can't help them, because I know that if I ever go back, I'll never leave.